Hey, what's up, mortals? It is I, the Silent Sheepdog here, with a new video for you. Welcome to part 3 of What If Deku Had the System. I just wanted to greet you guys by just saying sit back, relax, you're in for a treat. So, we begin. The hallway was as silent as it was tense, showing almost no signs of presence. It was empty, unbearably so, with only two people treading through it. These two were none other than Izuku and All Might, with the former following the latter. Izuku was still confused as to why All Might wanted to see him, and his rather anxious mind wasn't helping in any way. The green-haired boy had a lot to hide at the moment, so it was only natural for him to worry. The two continued down the halls, shadows being their only witnesses, until they suddenly stopped. "Come with me," the blonde hero then said, before opening one of the doors. Izuku was only 1 second behind All Might as he entered. Behind the door, there seemed to be some kind of lounge, with two couches that faced each other. Izuku carefully assessed the room in silence, until the sound of the door closing caught his attention. "Sir, may I ask what this is about? If I'm in trouble, I'd like to know what I did wrong," the young man then said, but was forced to cut himself off when turning to face what he thought would be All Might. Instead, he was greeted by a skeletal man with blonde hair that hung from his head like seaweed. This prompted Izuku to enter a battle stance while shouting, "Who are you, and what did you do to All Might?" with a commanding voice. Skeletal was visibly startled by this, as he panicked while saying, "Calm down, kid, I am All Might," with a rather desperate voice. Izuku was unchanged by this, adopting a firm expression as he said, "Like hell you are!" with the same voice as before. The skeletal man sighed upon hearing this, acting as if he didn't want to do whatever came next. Izuku kept his firm look locked onto the man, not changing his manner for anything. That is when the man suddenly got buffer, and the green-haired boy couldn't believe his eyes. In front of him right now stood All Might, radiating the presence that Izuku was familiar with. He didn't get to say anything, however, before the hero suddenly deflated in a cloud of steam. The skeletal man then proceeded to cough up blood. This made Izuku lower his guard, as he proceeded to get worried instead. All Might then assured the boy that he was all right, before proceeding to explain himself. He told Izuku that a few years ago he had been injured while fighting a powerful villain, one that the public didn't know about. This shocked the boy, but it only got more intense as All Might lifted his shirt to show a horrible scar over his stomach. "Pretty nasty, huh? Because of it, I can only be in my buff form for a few hours per day." The blonde hero then finished, lowering his shirt as he did. Izuku was still stunned, for he didn't think that All Might could be injured in such a way. "I'm sure you have a lot of questions right now, but I'm afraid that I didn't come here to talk about my faults as a hero," the skeletal man then said, with a voice that seemed calm. Izuku was brought back to attention by this, as he asked, "What did you want to talk about, then?" while sounding more serious. All Might's expression was also rather serious, as he pointed towards one of the couches and said, "Please, have a seat." This didn't help Izuku calm down in any way. All Might's voice was just as serious as his expression, and it made his mind go to some unsettling places. If All Might was being this serious, it could mean that he knew about Izuku's secret, and that really wouldn't be a good thing. The green-haired boy silently sat down on the couch after hearing this, as All Might sat down in front of him. The two looked at each other for a while, as if they were waiting for each other to speak, until the shadows below them caught Izuku's attention. Within the darkness he could clearly see the strained eyes of Igris, looking ready to strike the skeletal man down. "Don't do anything stupid now," Izuku then said aloud. Igris seemed to get the message, but then he was met with a confused response. "Excuse me?" All Might asked, wondering what was going on. Izuku finally realized what he had done, as he then tried to calm himself before saying, "It's nothing. Don't worry about it. Didn't you have something to say?" In an attempt to move on with the conversation, the skeletal man looked skeptical at first, but decided to brush it off before saying, "Yes, I wanted to talk about your actions during today's hero training," with a more serious tone. Izuku felt some relief wash over him, but he didn't get to bask in it long before sensing the oncoming subject. "Sir, if you're going to reprimand me for being too rough with Bakugo, I need you to understand that I had no other choice," he said, explaining himself before being questioned. All Might, however, looked rather confused, as he lightly waved his hand while saying, "I understand your course of action. Young Bakugo had already shown that he held no regard for the rules of the exercise. Therefore, you were right not to trust him to stand down after his first attempt. I'm not here to reprimand you. I want to praise you, actually." With a slightly awkward tone, now it was Izuku's turn to be confused, for he had expected the opposite. "You went out of your way to protect your classmates, even risking your own well-being without hesitation," the blonde hero then said, with a calmer voice. Izuku didn't know how to respond to this. He got the feeling that All Might wanted an explanation of some kind, but the young man wasn't sure of it himself. He knew what he did, and what could have happened to him, but he still couldn't find the words to explain himself. "I don't know why I did it. I just saw that they were in a line of fire and I didn't want them to get hurt. Looking back at it, I probably could have done it differently. I might have been able to pull them out of danger with telekinesis," Izuku then said, putting one hand on his chin as he did. This made All Might smile, before saying, "You were in the heat of the moment, and you did the thing that you thought was right. You chose to shield your classmates despite the risks. That act of self-sacrifice shows that you are a true hero. This brings me to what I actually wanted to talk about." With a proud voice, Izuku was glad to hear this from his idol, but then he got curious upon hearing that last part. All Might looked at his student with proud eyes as he asked, "Would you like to be my successor?" with an equally proud voice. Izuku went back to being confused, as All Might explained. The blonde hero possessed a powerful stockpiling quirk called One for All. Apparently, it was something that had been passed down between various generations of heroes, and now Izuku was offered to become the 9th user. "Wow, that is quite the story, and burden over one quirk," the green-haired boy said, showing almost no reaction whatsoever. All Might was very confused by this, for it seemed that Izuku didn't care about anything that he heard. "You aren't nearly as surprised or shocked as I thought you would be," the blonde then stated, his voice clearly showing his confusion. Izuku scratched the back of his head, as if he was thinking, before looking at All Might and saying, "I'm going to be honest. For the past year or so, I haven't had a single day that wasn't weird somehow. I've gotten so used to it that abnormalities are just a part of my regular Tuesday afternoon." With an awkward voice, All Might still looked confused, but he seemed to buy it. "All right, then. I guess that's just the world that we live in. Anyway, what do you say?" he then said, returning to his calmer composure. Now Izuku was forced to think. Just having All Might on his side would be a game changer, and if he also had his quirk, he would definitely become stronger. Everything seemed to point towards a yes, until it didn't. There was one factor that needed to be accounted for: attention. By possessing One for All, he would most certainly become more powerful, but he would also inherit its duties. All Might wasn't just looking for someone to hold his quirk, He was looking for the next symbol of peace, and that is what made Izuku uncertain. All Might's story was convincing, but Izuku could tell that some parts had been left out. One for All must have some enemies that All Might didn't mention. And to carry that quirk means to become the center of their attention. No offense, sir, but I can't accept your quirk, the green-haired boy said, his voice being way too calm. All Might's eyes widened upon hearing this as he asked, "What? Why?" Izuku looked at the blonde man, clearing his throat as he explained. "If I took your quirk, I would have to be in the spotlight. And I don't want that attention since I find that I work better in the shadows. Also, I don't need it. I'm going to get much stronger. So you would be better off giving it to someone else." With the same calm voice. All Might was shocked at first, but he understood. Izuku didn't want attention, and that was okay. But there was one thing that made him curious. The boy had claimed that he was going to get much stronger, so he didn't need One for All, as if he was certain of it. It could just be his pride speaking, or there was something else going on. "Very well then. I wish you good luck in the future," the blonde hero then said with a smile on his face, as he reached out for a handshake. Izuku saw this and immediately shook his hand, and that's when the system reacted. Title: The Successor of Peace has been obtained. When active, all stats are increased by 200% while facing the Monarch of Destruction. This includes minions. Izuku was dangerously close to yelling out loud upon hearing this, but he kept his composure in front of All Might. Shortly after the handshake had ended, he was pardoned and left through the door, being alone in the hallway once again. "What the hell was that?" the green-haired boy whispered, wanting to vent his reaction in some way. He didn't know what to say about this title. Anything that boosted his stats was good, but he didn't think that 200% was possible. Not only that, the target that was addressed in the title concerned him. He was called the Monarch of Shadows, and he could control the dead. So he couldn't even begin to imagine what this Monarch of Destruction would be capable of. This also told him something else. He was right. He had obtained the title only after being offered One for All. So this mysterious entity must be connected somehow. Which means that it is an enemy that All Might hadn't mentioned. Izuku contemplated all these things in his head as he continued to walk down the hall, when an unwanted voice decided to speak up. "My liege, may I speak?" Igris asked with a hushed tone. Normally, Izuku would have reprimanded the knight for doing this, but since no one else was around, it was fine. "As long as you keep it down," the green-haired boy answered, wondering what Igris wanted to talk about. The shadow narrowed his eyes slightly, before stretching its figure up to its master's ear and whispering. "I wanted to talk about your actions during that exercise. Sir All Might has praised you for it, but I intend to pull you back to earth." Izuku was rather shocked, as Igris then continued. "What you did was stupid. It may have been heroic, as you call it, but you shouldn't risk your life like that. We both know that you would have found a better solution had you stopped to think. Which brings me to my next concern. I fought alongside you enough to know that no amount of stress will affect your judgment. So what happened out there?" While sounding more serious, Izuku was shocked once again, for it turns out that he was being reprimanded now. He understood Igris's concern and tried to clear it up. "This wasn't like any of the battles that we fought together. I'm not saying that it was tough, because it wasn't. I'm saying that it was different. When I fight alongside you, I don't need to worry about your well-being, because I will continue to insist that you are more skilled than I am. But Uraraka, Ida, Bakugo? They're all inexperienced amateurs, so I can't trust them to protect themselves. They're also weak, and can easily die, unlike you, he said, with the certain voice that Igris knew him by. The Shadow Knight was now intrigued as he asked, "So, my liege becomes a better warrior when the incompetent and weak are out of harm's way?" With a curious voice. Izuku thought for a second, and then responded by saying, "Yes, that's a pretty accurate description," with the same calm voice. Igris nodded upon hearing this, as he exclaimed a formal, "Noted," before descending back into his master's shadow. This video was sponsored by Honey. Honey is a free browser add-on available on Google, Opera, Firefox, Safari. If it's a browser, it has Honey. Honey automatically saves you money when you check out sites like Amazon, Papa John's, and Kohl's. Wherever you shop, it's a good chance that Honey can save you money. All you have to do when you're checking out at these big sites is click that little orange button, and it will scan the entire internet and find discount codes for you. If there is a coupon code, they will find it. And if there's not a coupon code, you can rest assured that you are getting the best price possible. If you install Honey right now, you can save so much money on your online shopping, doing nothing. There's no reason not to install Honey. It takes 2 clicks. 10 million people use it. 100,000 5-star reviews. Unless you hate money, you should install Honey. Use the link in the description to start saving money now. The next day, it would prove rather difficult for anyone to enter the UA grounds, for a giant flock of reporters were blocking the gates. The mob was there to ask questions about one person, All Might, and seemed to have no qualms with swarming the students who tried to pass. Izuku was one of those poor students, along with Ida and Uraraka. They tried their hardest, but they just couldn't get through. For Izuku, it was more difficult since he was strong enough to push them all back, so he needed to pass through them without hurting them. "Come on now, we'll be late for class!" Ida exclaimed urgently, while trying to push his way forward. It was upon hearing this that Izuku had enough, and decided that he was going to get through this, even if it meant bending the rules. "Ida, have you read the Bible by any chance?" the green-haired boy asked, with a rather stern voice. Ida was confused upon hearing this, as he answered by saying, "Only in small portions. Why do you—" But before he could finish his sentence, the reporters were all pushed away. Not only that, they had been separated to form a single, empty walking aisle. "Because the Red Sea has paved the way once more," Izuku then announced, while holding his palms towards the 2 sections of reporters. "Now then, let's get to class," the green-haired boy then said, his voice sounding far more confident than they remembered. "Amen, I guess?" Uraraka then commented, right before all 3 of them proceeded onwards towards their classroom. It took them a few minutes, but they managed to get to the classroom just before Aizawa. The tired teacher walked his way up to the podium, scanning everyone in class before saying, "Good morning, class," with his usual tired voice. He then took a breath before proceeding to say, "I've gone over your performance yesterday, and you all performed well," with an unchanged voice. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief upon hearing this, until they saw how Aizawa's expression suddenly turned into one of annoyance. They all feared that the teacher was going to take his words back, but then he turned his expression towards a certain blonde and said, "Bakugo, if you try something like that again, you will regret it. You should be grateful to Midoriya. He's the sole reason that I don't have to expel you." With a slightly agitated voice. Bakugo got even more frustrated upon hearing this. For it was true. Ida and Uraraka would have been hurt if Izuku hadn't acted, and Aizawa wouldn't have hesitated to expel him had that happened. "Moving on," You need to pick a class representative. I don't care how you do it, just choose one before my nap ends," the tired teacher then said before crawling into his sleeping bag. Immediately, everyone began to argue about who should be class rep, and no one seemed to get any form of sense brought forward. Eventually, they decided that they would come to an answer through an election, and the votes came in fairly quickly. The results showed that Izuku had been chosen as class rep, with Yaoyorozu as vice rep. The class seemed to be content with this, except for Bakugo, who was erupting like a volcano. Izuku himself looked to be calm, but deep down, he was just as confused. He didn't understand why he had been chosen. He wasn't expecting to get any votes at all. He knew that he was one of the few that didn't vote for himself, because he didn't want this role, yet somehow managed to get 4 votes in total. The newly elected class rep sighed heavily, only now realizing that his efforts to go under the radar may have been for naught. Later that day, Izuku went to the cafeteria to get lunch. He wasn't alone, for he was joined by a rather large group of people. They consisted of Uraraka, Ida, Kirishima, Tokoyami, and Yaoyorozu. They all sat and conversed at the same table, until the election from earlier was brought up. "How on earth did I end up as class rep?" Izuku asked, contemplating on his past actions for an answer. The others were brought to attention upon hearing this, as Uraraka spoke up.
"I may be a little biased because of the heroes versus villains exercise, but you're both strong and competent. At least, that's why I voted for you," she said with a joyous tone.
Izuku nearly choked on his food upon hearing this, for this was the last thing he had expected. He then had a realization, so he asked, "Wait, how many of you voted for me?" while hoping that he was wrong. To answer his question, everyone except Yaoyorozu raised their hand. Izuku lowered his head and began to tear at his own hair upon seeing this, as he blatantly asked, "Why?" while sounding like he was in pain. The others seemed to be a little surprised, for they thought that he would be more excited. That's when they began sounding their reasoning one after another. "I, too, am a little biased, so you earned my vote by repeatedly showing your heroism," Ida said, with a hint of pride. This was followed by Kirishima, who said, "I agree with Ida. The class rep is our leader, so they need to embody what it means to be a hero. You're also very manly," with a burning fire behind his voice. Izuku could feel himself shrinking into his seat more and more while listening to this as Yaoyorozu spoke up as well. "I didn't vote for you, but I must still share my opinion. I will admit that I was hoping to be class rep, but I have nothing against it going to you. I trust you for the same reason Kirishima does, minus the manly part," she said, with a formal tone. Izuku was completely speechless now, but there was one more. "Okay, so what's your reason to..." The green-haired boy was about to ask, only to find something odd when turning his head. What he saw was a being of darkness, much like his own shadow soldiers, but this one was shaped like a bird. It was staring at him, all while being uncomfortably close. He recognized it as Tokoyami's quirk, which made him even more confused. "Tokoyami? What is your quirk doing?" Izuku asked, hoping to get an answer. It wasn't Tokoyami that responded, however. It was the shadow who said, "I have a name. It's Dark Shadow," with an annoyed voice. Izuku was unaffected by this, as he rephrased himself. Sorry, Tokoyami, what is Dark Shadow doing?" Now there was some tension over the table, and Dark Shadow didn't seem too happy. Izuku went as far as to look at his own shadow, which was cast over the table, to make sure that Igris wouldn't act up. "I don't know, but I will answer your previous question. I voted for you because my gut told me to do so, and I always trust my guts," Tokoyami then said with a calm voice. Izuku nodded in response to this, while feeling even more awkward than before. "What's wrong, class rep? Shouldn't you be happy about your new position? Dark Shadow then said, speaking as if he was trying to taunt Izuku. The green-haired boy could sense this taunt from a mile away, so he didn't let it get to him. I am glad that people trust me with such an important role, but I would have voted for myself if I really wanted it, Izuku then said with a calm voice. Everyone was shocked at first, but then they realized that he had only had 4 votes. Dark Shadow didn't back down upon hearing this and said, Why wouldn't you want to be class rep? Now you can boss people around however you like. With the same voice as before, Izuku tried to remain calm upon hearing this as he said, I don't like ordering people around. Dark Shadow was about to say something else upon hearing this until a loud noise interrupted him. Everyone jumped in surprise at this sudden noise as they looked towards its source. It was Izuku, who had slammed his hand against the table. The green-haired boy wore a cold expression as he looked towards Dark Shadow and said, Sorry, there was a fly on the table. You know how they are. Always shoving their noses where it doesn't belong. With a cold and intimidating voice. Everyone was stunned upon hearing this, unable to say anything. Dark Shadow definitely couldn't say anything, because Izuku was basically telling him to stop talking. The table was now silent for a long while, until that silence was suddenly broken when an alarm went off. Everyone was confused about it, until they heard that someone had gotten onto campus. Izuku and the others stood up to follow the other students, but that wasn't a good idea. Everyone panicked and rushed through the corridors, making it impossible to move. Izuku and his friends were just being dragged along with the current, unable to do anything about their situation. This wasn't good, for it was only a matter of time before someone got trampled. Izuku knew this, but he didn't know how to defuse the situation. My liege, the voice of Igris then said, more loudly than before. Izuku wanted to be mad now, but he couldn't in his current state. Besides, who was going to hear him in this flood? Look through the windows. It's the press outside, the Shadow Knight then said. Izuku braced himself upon hearing this, all while pushing towards the windows. When he got there, he realized that Igris was right, and that both Aizawa and Present Mike were already dealing with it. This relieved Izuku a great deal, but it didn't help what was happening. The students were still panicking, and they weren't going to stop until they knew that there was nothing to worry about. Izuku needed to get everyone's attention, and he only knew of one way to do that. Just like he had done at the gate that morning, he needed to use Dominator's touch, only now, at a much larger scale. He took a deep breath before he acted. He used the power on as many people as he could, knocking them all off their feet. It might not have been gentle, but it did stop them from going crazy. Izuku panted heavily after doing this, before he took another deep breath and shouted, Everyone calm down! It's just the media outside! The teachers are already dealing with it, so there's nothing to worry about! With a loud voice. Everyone was confused upon hearing this at first, until they moved toward the windows and saw that it was true. We're UA students, so act like it already. Go back to your classrooms, preferably without running around like headless chickens, Izuku then said, sounding much calmer now. The students were all calm and did as they were told, all while Izuku had to steady himself against the railing. Using Dominator's touch to that extent had drained him, but the skill did level up from it. Amen, Midoriya, a voice then said. Izuku turned to see that it was Ida, and he looked proud. Izuku forced a smile upon hearing this, while still panting heavily. How did the media get onto campus? Ida then asked, seriously wondering what had happened. Izuku was wondering the same thing as he looked towards his shadow. The shimmering eyes of Igris were within it, awaiting its master's orders. I don't know. But I hope they look into this, Izuku said, to which Ida nodded in agreement. But the words were actually for Igris, who immediately understood his master's order. Izuku and the other students then went back to their classrooms, while Igris jumped between the shadows to find out what happened. Thank you all for sticking around, and I hope that you enjoyed. Before we leave, we would like to just let you know that We the Celestials has many other channels for your entertainment and viewing purposes. All the information you need is right below here in the description, so feel free to check out all the other incredible projects that our team creates. Secondly, on behalf of We the Celestials, I'd like to thank everyone involved in the production of today's awesome content. Their details will be in the description below. That's all for today's video, so goodbye and have a divine day.